Okay, guys, welcome back to Basics episode 26. We're fairly certain. Where I'm taking my lovely fiancée Jessica and teaching her how to trade. So, if this is your first video, again, it's episode 26. We have 25 other episodes. We're pretty heavy into it now. So, if you're starting right now, just pause the video, go on either of our channels, which are right here. And there's a playlist for each one that will go over, again, what is a stock, technical analysis, fundamental, now run, statistical, which I know you're going to love, all of the statistics and mathematics. But we're taking, this may seem weird that I'm putting this here. First of all, it's just because we're actually going to go over utility theory, prospect theory, and the St. Petersburg paradox. And so the next 3 episodes, even though I put them in the statistics section, they're basically psychological. It's all psychological theory. The main question that I think most people ask is why in this part do you do the psychological stuff? And it's mainly because this is why we use statistics, right? So over the next 3 episodes, my hope is that I prove to you that your brain's not a good brain and that no one's brain's a good brain. So we're going to talk about how people...
My brain's a great brain.
When it comes to estimating statistics, when it comes to estimating probabilities, when it comes to all this, we suck at it as human beings. And that's what we're going to talk about. So no math. In the next 3 episodes, there'll be a very small amount of math. I almost got you super hyped there, but it's only to prove these mental
So why is it under statistical
issues.
analysis?
Because this is why we use statistics. We use statistics to either try to predict human psychology or try to understand where our own biases lie so that we can use statistics to get over them.
Okay, so are we going to be doing statistics then?
Not really in the next 3. These are kind of a lead up to the next ones.
Okay.
All right. It'll make sense in the grand scheme of things. There is statistical things in nature. The other thing is I am not an economist. A lot of this is like heavy economics theory. So if there's somebody who's watching this who's like, oh my God, he's wrong about all these things, I'm using very loose estimation. I'm doing the best that I can to make all of this like. You could go to university for 6 years on what we're about to cover in the next half hour kind of thing, right? This episode is all the basic theories of how economists have tried to understand and predict what human beings are going to do. So utility theory, when we talk about utility, just so you know that this word in this context basically just means how much joy or how much worth or how much utility you get out of something, and in our case it's going to be money. All right. Initially, when we were trying to figure out why and how human beings did certain things, we would say, okay, well, humans, they like a thing only because it gives them joy. So the theory being that if I give somebody $50 or if I give somebody $50 or $100 and take $50 away, well, they both have been given $50, so they're both equally as happy, right? Because their utility has gone from 0 to plus $50. But then it led to the theory of, okay, well, why is it that if I give a millionaire $50 or if I give someone who's very poor $50, the amount of utility or joy they would get from that would be way different? Right?
Okay.
So the utility theory was kind of
like
the
joy meter?
Basically, it was the original theory that said everybody is going to get X amount happier if you give them this.
Okay.
And we turned...
Didn't I read something that like people who like make up to the increase from 50,000 to 70,000 is pretty good, but when you go from like 70,000 a year to 90,000, it's not so great.
Right. And that's what blew this theory out of the water. So human beings worked on that initial theory of everybody, if you give everybody $50, they're going to be $50 happier. And then that's not what we see in the real world, right? So that became kind of... So I've explained the theory and explained why it's wrong really quickly. But again, that would be like a 2-year university course.
Got it.
And I gave some example here. They call it diminishing marginal utility, where is you really like that first bowl of ice cream, but that fifth bowl of ice cream, I'm waiting for the comment.
You're talking to the wrong lady here.
isn't as impactful and maybe negative. And there's lots of other examples. So, right, if I give you $1 billion, that's a huge deal. If I give Jeff Bezos, who's worth like $100 billion, an extra $1 billion, it's not that big of a deal. Okay. And then it can actually even turn negative. So if you think about it as cooks in the kitchen, if you have one kitchen and one cook, he'll make, like, say, 1 meal an hour. If you put 2 cooks in there, maybe they'll actually make 2 meals an hour. If you put 3 cooks in there, they're not going to make 3 meals an hour. Eventually, they'll start bumping into each other. And so this is diminishing marginal utility, which kind of disproved a lot of the theory here. This was a way that they finally kind of not really disproved the theory, but came up with this paradox that says, okay, this doesn't make sense. Choices should be on an expected value calculation. And that essentially means that if I gave you a question or a choice, and that was, you can have $100 or you can have a 50-50 shot at $200. Mm-hmm. In theory, it's the same question, right? The expected outcome of that is $100, right? A guaranteed 100% chance of $100 and a 50-50 shot at $200 is the same thing.
How?
Because if we play the game 1,000 times...
Yeah. Oh, okay.
In the grand scheme of things, you'll make the same amount.
In the grand scheme of things. Right. I'm just saying, like, if you straight up ask me right now, I'm going to try for that too.
Hold on to that. That's the exact same thing that all of these next 3 videos are about. Okay. That thing that mathematically you're wrong, but everybody thinks that way.
All right.
If anybody ever walked up to me, even as someone who studies statistics, and gives me, I'll give you $100 right now, or a one-time 50-50 shot at $200, I'm taking the $100.
I know.
But it's
I know.
Mathematically, they're the same outcome. So, in theory, this is the choice they give in this St. Petersburg paradox, where if you give a choice of a 30% chance of $200 or a 50% chance of $100, right? That 30% chance has an expected outcome of $60, whereas that 50-50 shot has an expected outcome of $50. Does that calculation make sense?
Not at all.
Okay. So we'll take a second on this. This is really the only kind of math you need to learn to understand this.
Great.
But expected outcome is simply what's the outcome and what's the probability of that outcome.
Yeah.
Right? So to get the expected value of 50% chance of $100, it's $50. Right? And it's because, again, imagine the game is played 1 million times. Every time we talk about a statistical game,
right.
It's played 1 million times.
Okay.
Right? So on average, if I give you a 50% chance of $100, on average, when you play the game, you'll get $50.
Okay.
Right? Averaged out over 1 million trials, right?
Okay.
And same with the 30% chance of $200. If you average that out, it's $60. So it's better, mathematically, to take a lower probability chance that's going to pay you more money.
Okay.
So the theory, and again, there's a reason this is a paradox, right?
So you take the 200.
Right.
Okay.
Because the expected, and so, again, this is just the setup to the theory. The theory was that human beings are rational enough that they would look at something like this and they would say, the probability, even though it's only 30%, of making the $200 is way higher. And we see this a lot in the real world. People play the lottery, right? You've got a 1 in a billion shot of hitting it rich.
Why are we saying that the 30% of the 200 is more probable than 50% of
not
100?
No one's saying more probable. Right? No one's saying that. They're saying that the expected outcome of both of these games, mathematically, the $200 is higher.
Okay.
Because the expected outcome, again, played 1 million times, is that you're going to make $60. Whereas the expected outcome of the other one, played 1 million times, you're going to make $50.
Okay.
right? So again, the theory was that every human being is just rational enough to do this math. And if you presented them these options,
That's an assumption.
that's why, right? I'm tearing down the theories in this first episode, so in the next two I can explain how the brain actually works. But we need to know how we thought the brain worked initially.
Okay.
So, the St. Petersburg paradox, they said, okay, if this is true, if people have the ability in their head to do the math, come up with the correct probabilities, and make a decision, then in theory, if I presented to you this second game, you would pay any amount of money to me to play this game. And the game is, we're going to flip a coin, and every single time it lands heads, I'm going to add $2 to what I owe you. The first time it hits tails, I'm going to pay you that money. So if I flip it once and it hits heads, then I pay you $2, right? If I flip it twice, I pay you $4, right? On the 10th flip, the payout, if all of them were heads, the payout would be $1,000, right?
Okay.
So the theory being that you should want to come to me and pay me $1 million to play this game. And that's because, in theory, the expected outcome's unlimited. There's no way to do this equation on the left with the theory on the right. Because in theory, you could hit heads forever. We know it's statistically unlikely, but in theory you could.
Okay.
So when nobody wanted to play this game, because they realized that even though in theory your outcome is an infinite amount of money, in practicality you're probably going to make $2. Right? 2 or 4 or 6. Again, what this proves is that human beings, A, either can't do the math that well in their head, or B, will always want to go for a sure thing as opposed to what mathematically makes sense. And you've said the same thing yourself. I would take the $100 versus even playing a game that may make me more money but with a lower probability, right? Even though it's wrong, right? The correct thing to do is to make the most amount of money you can, right? But people are risk averse, and this is what we've learned. So this is prospect theory, and this is what we use now basically in economics and in trading psychology about how the brain works. And what prospect theory does is it anchors your starting point very heavily. Everything else we've talked about to date says that every human being should look at every financial situation and say, which of these is going to make me the most money? And now we're saying that that doesn't matter. That human beings, and it's been proven, losses hurt way more than gains help, right? And that's what this S-curve is. So just a quick second on how to read this chart. Basically, the center bit is your starting point. That's where you exist as a human being. And as you move right...
The joy meter goes higher.
No, that's your gains. So that's the more money I'm paying you.
Yeah, but your utility goes up.
Your
which
utility
is the joy
goes
meter.
up, basically.
Yeah.
But you see how if you go down, the meter drops way faster than if you go up. The slope here is further down and way more dramatic. And this is talking about how, so from your starting point where you are right now, if I give you so say I give you $50 and then I walk away, your joy meter goes up. But if I give you $100 and then I rip $50 out of your hand, people, when they've done the math, are almost more mad even though they got $50 because they had more.
It's like getting a raise and then having that raise, like I gave you $1 raise and then a month later they're saying, actually, I need you to work for $1 less, and you're going to be really bummed.
Right, because your starting point moved.
Yeah.
Right? So again, this is where it gets really important to trading, because you got to remember your starting point in your head resets after every trade. And you've seen that even in your own paper trading where you were up big and then ended up down, not as big, but it hurt more because you were up big, right? So again, this is why we're going over these. The origin is both actual and expected experience, which you've just touched on. If I come to you and I say, okay, Jess, next month you're getting $1 raise. So you've never actually gotten the money. And then I come back to you before the raise would have started and said, sorry, we re-looked at the books. You're no longer getting that raise. Even though your actual starting point was the same, your expected starting point was different. Therefore, again, the loss hurt more.
Flipping tables and quitting.
And again, so this is all just talking about how the setup works, right? So why your brain works this way. And then in the next episodes, we'll talk about the actual biases that you see and how we can get around them with trading and technology and all of this. So again, somebody gets $50, someone else gets $100 but loses 50. The guy who gets $50 happy, the guy who still netted $50
is bummed. Yeah.
Right? So again, to summarize, because we're almost done here, the beginning talked about, the human brain works like this. We're rational, logical creatures, and we're all about getting better as things go. And now as we go from example to example to example, we find that that's not at all the case, right? We constantly adjust our starting point. And this is the real kind of kicker with this. Just two more examples. But one was they studied Olympic medalists, and they found that if you won a silver medal, you were mad. But if you won a bronze medal, you were happy. And it's because the bronze level medal guy, he looked down and he said, okay, I'm better than 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. The silver medal said, I almost had gold. And that's all that they would focus on, is that they were the second place loser as opposed to better than everyone except one guy, right? And the last experiment to prove it is the pen versus mug thing. And they've done this many, many times in universities, and this one's a little bit different, but very important for what we're going over in the next episode. And this is, you showed up to university the first day, and the professor either had a pen or a mug randomly on your desk. They said, you get to keep those. Those are yours at the beginning of the class. And at the end of the class, said, okay, how many people want to trade? How many people want to trade your pen for a mug? Or they were both worth about $5. Or how much do you want to sell those for? Nobody, on average, trades. And every time they're offered to sell it, it's more than $5. So by owning something for a brief period of time that you didn't know that you were going to have an hour ago, you put a higher weight on it. So you're starting to see some of the things that are related to trading. If you're in a position, you're probably going to value that position higher, right? So it's starting to make sense now. You don't think I'm just rambling on for no reason?
Well, I didn't say that.
Okay, so that's it for this episode. Again, the next two are going to go more into detail, but this is kind of I wanted to get a framework of how, in theory, your brain should do this. It should look at every trade and say, okay, here's my probability of profit, here's my risk reward, all the things that we've been going over. But how, in reality, your brain won't work like that. And then what are we going to do to make sure? Because the first step is to make sure that we understand the biases. And that's what we're going over next episode. All of the individual mental biases. And then it's going to be, how do we conquer those biases? Right? How do we get over them with technology, or just knowing that they exist and checking ourselves every time we see them happen? Make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll see you guys in the next episode.